So welcome, our brilliant colleague, Allan. I so appreciate your consistent leadership and solidarity. And as always at SETC, we begin our conversations by giving thanks to the original stewards of the various lands we're on. We give thanks to all our ancestors, all those who toiled without compassion or compensation. We give thanks to all our elders and community stalwarts whose shoulders we stand on as we build, share, and learn together for our collective liberation and sovereignty. So, Allan, can you please share a little bit about your remarkable work with our listeners and our viewers?
Yeah, thanks. First of all, it's great to be here. Thanks for inviting me on to discuss the work of Matthew House and my involvement there. So Matthew House, I serve as the executive director for Matthew House Ottawa, and we have two programs. I'll give you just a really quick rundown, and then you can ask some questions. I'm sure we'll dig into it. But we have a furniture bank, and essentially our furniture bank. We furnish probably about 150 homes a month in the city of Ottawa, and it's all for essentially, you think of people who have secured housing but don't have the funds to furnish their homes. And you'd be surprised, it's actually a huge challenge. We talk about housing, talk about homelessness, and so we always think about getting the apartment. That's the big thing, right? Getting your home. But it's a big reality that a lot of people who actually get the keys to their place, they don't have the funds to furnish, so their kids might be sleeping on the floor, there's nowhere to eat. So every day we furnish often about 8 to 10 homes here. And within a day, people can have a home that was empty and it's now filled with furniture for kind of just really increasing the quality of life for that household. We also have a refugee services program, which is a pretty generic term, but that program we specifically work diverting refugee claimants from homelessness. And so we have something like 18 homes, I think currently 155 beds and 6 more homes on the way. But the focus of that program is essentially to take newly arrived refugee claimants, get them out of the shelter system, off the streets, support them in their day-to-day needs, food, shelter, all the settlement supports that they need when they're brand new to Canada, don't know where to go, don't have anyone supporting them. Get them to a place within a few months where they're working, housed, contributing to their community, living, sustaining themselves. It's a huge impact for them and obviously the broader community as well.
Yeah, I can imagine. That's tremendous work. 150 houses a month and just the responsiveness of these services. There are so many folks in need of these services. So once again, I just really applaud the leadership of you and your colleagues and the way you respond to community needs. So my next question is, what's inspiring you right now? What is you curious or what's keeping you up at nights?
Yeah, I think that for me, the biggest inspiration I would say is just the tangibility of the work that we're doing. And so we talk about furnishing homes. And I mentioned even just briefly, like the idea of seeing a home that's empty and then a day later it's full of everything that's needed at a home. So that's inspiring, just that tangibility, I think, as you can see the impact on someone's life. And at our refugee services program, I think the impact not only on the individual, but on the whole community. So for instance, every person that we bring into our homes, I said we have 155 beds. So you can imagine that's 150 plus people that are not on the streets, not in the shelter system. And that has a knock-on effect. Obviously, that individual benefits, but it reduces the strain on the whole sector, really, because all those beds then are available for someone else who's needing that support temporarily. So I think I really like that sort of knock-on effects and the benefits that you can see that compound in the community level. I find that very inspiring. I say one other comment in terms of inspiration. We have an amazing team, and I realize that it's like, you can talk about teams and it sounds a bit jargony in some ways, but I am just so grateful for the people that I work with, many of whom have come as refugees themselves and have really decided to sort of give back from the benefits that they had when they first arrived in Canada, going through programs like ours, or sometimes even not, but then seeing the benefit of what we're doing, wanting to be a part of that. I'm really inspired by that as well.
That's incredible. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you sharing and just the authenticity and nature of your work. So my next question is, what are some of the challenges and barriers you and your colleagues are working on, and what are some of the approaches you're taking to overcome some of these challenges and barriers?
The biggest challenge, I'll focus on the refugee services side. The biggest challenge that we have right now is essentially at a national level. There's no plan, there's no coordination, there's no strategy for what happens when a refugee claimant first arrives in the country. Now, I should say there's a system for processing claims, and so that is in place, and Canada does a good job on that side. But when it comes to basic needs and meeting basic needs like food and shelter and sort of key supports, there's nothing, there's no direction for claimants when they first arrive. And so that's a huge gap in our system. And the result of that is that there's a very high rate of homelessness among refugee claimants in the country. And this has always been the case for decades. The challenge that we're facing right now is that the number of forced migrants in the world has been increasing, and something like 110 million now. While Canada is never going to see a large percentage of the world's forced migrants, the number of refugees coming to Canada has increased. So, for example, last year, I think it was 140,000 refugee claims in Canada. That compared to about 92,000, I believe, in 2022. So a 50% increase. When you have no plan for 140,000 people arriving in the country, that is a recipe for, you could say, a disaster. So as long as that's the case, that there's no plan, no coordination, we'll continue to see a significant amount of homelessness in major cities across the country, which means that locally we have to deal with this. Like, what do we do with all the refugee claimants arriving? Nowhere to go. So for us, the challenge is then how do we just continue to open more beds, secure more homes? A lot of it actually comes down to just like building relationships with landlords that are willing to rent to an organization like ours, which on the surface, if you're a landlord and you hear the work we're doing, we work with homeless people, we work with refugees. I think there's a bit of some barriers that we have to overcome in terms of convincing landlords that it actually makes really good sense for them to rent to us. And I mean, the short version is we're going to pay our rent every month. And we have a program where your home is going to be better taken care of than anyone else that would rent that place. But there are some barriers we have to overcome in terms of just getting houses. So I think we have about 10 landlords right now. And the good news is we've been doing this now for a few years. And we have such a good reputation that landlords actually are referring us to other people in the community and other landlords. So it's sort of like we got some momentum now, which is great.
It's a perfect segue. Do you have a set of key priorities right now in your work that you'd like to amplify? So I think that you've shared a lot, but are there some key priorities that you'd like to share with our community of practice?
Yeah, so I guess our priority / goal, and we can come back to goals maybe a little bit as well separately, but I think we really want to be able to divert every refugee claimant that arrives in Ottawa from homelessness. And so that means more beds, essentially. But there's also a piece that we're working on right now, hopefully in tandem with the city and some partner organizations in the community level as well. But to create a sort of reception center for refugee claimants when they first arrive in the city. Because what happens right now is because there's no coordination, refugee claimants arrive and they sort of just end up downtown at the emergency shelters. And so if we have a reception center where we can just avoid people ending up on the streets or in the emergency shelters. Often there's not even a bed in the shelters, and these days they're pretty packed. So creating a locally coordinated system with a reception center, say there's 100+ beds, it's a bit of a triage. We can provide very necessary supports early on, and then divert people, get people, refugee claimants out into houses like we have, kind of more in the transitional housing. And I should say that our program currently, we have two types of houses. We have what we call reception homes and transition homes. The idea being that there's a lot of needs in the first sort of few weeks, couple of months maybe. Transition homes sort of 3-4 months until we can find something longer term. And if we add the reception center at one sort of key point where all this, the city staff and partners and community members know, oh, if this is a refugee claimant, send them there. That'll just create a bit of a flow, I think, in the system across the whole city, really, where we can divert all the claimants from homelessness. But it's really a function of just needing more beds at this point, because the capacity that we have, as I mentioned, right now it's 155. I think by the end of the year we'll have 250 beds. But realistically, I think we probably need more like 500 or 600 in Ottawa to be able to sort of deal with the flow of refugee claimants who are arriving.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate you sharing and once again amplifying this important work and the clear chasm in terms of support that's needed. Like, not only have you identified gaps and you have a strong analysis of those gaps, but you're also framing out some solutions that I think make a lot of sense, especially for the beneficiary of these services. So once again, I really appreciate how you frame things for us. So my second last question is, in terms of your ultimate goal, what does success look like and feel like to you and your colleagues?
Yeah, well, success. I mean, it's interesting when you're in this kind of work. There's really sort of like various levels, right? Success at the individual level for us is taking someone who is homeless and within a few months, usually it's an average stay of maybe 5 or 6 months in our program, taking someone who's homeless and then getting them to a point where they're working, they're housed, they have community around them, and they're contributing members of the community. I think that's success at the sort of individual level. At a local level, I already mentioned, I think, really wanting to have coordination for the whole sector so that we have a plan and know what to do when refugee claimants are first coming. At a national level, it's really that same thing writ large to say, like, we have to have a plan across the country. Because again, 140,000 people arriving in the country not knowing where to go, that's a huge risk in terms of homelessness for those individuals, but also then has negative knock-on effects at the community level. And so I think at each of those levels, it really comes down to just like getting someone who's a refugee claimant first arrived in the country and supporting them early on with the things that they need. You do that, hundreds, thousands of times over. It sounds like it's a lot of work, but it's actually quite simple. There's only a few things that are needed: a bed, food, a few supports in the first few weeks, especially first couple of months. And it's not going to be a challenge that, well, I'll say it positively. It's something that we can deal with very quickly.
Indeed. Thank you. So my last question, do you have any closing thoughts or calls to action for our listeners and our viewers?
Well, I guess one of the things that I touched on this a few times. We really do need the feds to step up in terms of creating a plan for refugee claimants in the country. So I think, finding organizations, and I'm on the board for the Canadian Council for Refugees as one example, and we are working on a campaign to essentially build some awareness of this as being a gap in our system and getting the feds to take this on. We saw that there was some funding that came out in the last in the budget, a couple of weeks ago, talking about housing and homelessness and refugee claimants. But we don't just need some money thrown at the problem. We actually need to see leadership from various levels of government coming together to tackle this issue. So I think finding organizations like Matthew House Ottawa, where I work, and networks like the Canadian Council of Refugees, and supporting those efforts and those campaigns to essentially see the coordination and the sort of national plan in place. I think that's something that's very doable. And the nice thing about it is the work that we do is actually very low cost. Like, the outcomes are better and it's low cost. So immediately you see savings with investments in this area. So I mean, sounds like a bit of a tangent, but I think I can loop it back to connect. For instance, like our program at Matthew House, it's $800 to $1,000 per bed for every bed that we have per month. Okay, so if you have a refugee claimant, they're homeless, if they end up in the shelter system, it's going to cost, could be, thousands of dollars a month. And the outcomes are really bad because they get stuck in the shelter system. They kind of get into more of a likely chronic homeless situation. Send that person to Matthew House Ottawa. Usually within 5 or 6 months, they're out of our program. So that's costing $5,000. But then they're working, they're paying taxes, they're taking care of themselves, they're likely healthier, permanently, right? That is a benefit that immediately we can see compound across the country if we actually have support for programs like ours, and there's a plan to get refugee claimants to those types of programs. So, I think that I guess the closing thought would be support efforts to see more of this type of program, this type of model replicated and growing across the country, because it's going to benefit claimants, but it's also going to reduce the strain on the homelessness sector and the housing challenges that we're seeing across the country right now.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Thank you so much for framing out the cost savings and the cost benefit analysis. Like, I can only imagine not just the cost savings around housing, but healthcare utilization costs and a whole bunch of other costs related to the social determinants of health. So once again, I really appreciate you framing that. And yeah, I applaud the call to action, because there is a support that's needed from the public and philanthropic sector and private sector. All three sectors, I think, could play a stronger role in resourcing essential services like your own. So once again, I applaud your leadership and all the incredible work you and your colleagues are facilitating on behalf of so many. And as always at SETC, we close these conversations the way we began, by giving thanks to the original stewards of various lands we're on. We give thanks to all our ancestors, all those who toiled without compassion or compensation. We give thanks to all our elders and community stalwarts whose shoulders we stand on as we build, share, and learn together for our collective liberation and sovereignty. Thank you so much, Allan. I so appreciate your leadership.
Thank you.